Welcome back to the Must Read Alaska podcast. I'm your host, Todd, and today we are honored to welcome a guest who operates on the front lines of spiritual warfare in the Catholic Church. Joining us is Mr. Kyle Clement, a co-founder of Liber Christo and one of the most respected voices in Catholic deliverance ministry today. For over 20 years, Kyle has worked shoulder to shoulder with Father Chad Ripperger, helping to develop and implement the Liber Christo method, a clear four-phase protocol that brings much needed objectivity and authentic Catholic discipline to cases of suspected diabolical affliction. Kyle is not a theorist. He is a practitioner and educator who has trained priest, deacon, and lay teams across multiple dioceses. He has created an extensive library of teaching resources on the occult, Freemasonry, pornography, the proper roles of case facilitators and mentors, and the centrality of the sacraments and authority structure in lasting liberation. Whether he's explaining the four-phase protocol or unpacking how the enemy exploits specific footholds, Kyle consistently brings clarity, humility, and fidelity to the church teaching. Today, we'll be exploring a couple topics in the battle ahead, so preparing your soul for spiritual combat and what it means to be a Catholic man in today's society. Please welcome Mr. Kyle Clement to the show.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
Yeah, of course, it's a pleasure. And I think one of the great things that we have here in front of us is you are going to be visiting us here in Alaska soon.
That's right. That's right. My wife, Valerie, and I will be traveling to Alaska the first part of next month, and we're very much looking forward to it.
This the first time that you'll be joining us here in this great state?
It will. It will. It's been on a bucket list for a long, long time, and that sounds like this sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I can say that for most of the people, it does a lot better when you see it in person. So I hope that you guys have plenty of time to be able to get out and see the sights as you're bouncing around and giving talks here to the various people across the state.
Well, I think we've got a very free schedule. I think we're going to get a lot of time to get out, do a little fishing, see some sights, and um, that's what we're really looking forward to.
Well, that's fantastic, sir. We're certainly looking forward to having you here, and I know that you're coming up, and Deacon Des and Dr. Cindy, who are a couple of contributors here to Must Read Alaska, they're helping organize the event. We'll have a bit more information coming out about where people can come and see talks that you might be giving around the state. But it's certainly going to be a welcomed discussion. I think you're probably just as familiar as many of the people, but there just seems to be this fascination in our culture right now of one, we have the discussion where we talk about aliens and all the various fun things that continue to pop up in the news media. But I think on the counter side of that is you're seeing this resurgence in people of all generations asking a question of, why, what's out there? Maybe there's something to this spirituality that we've been told, our entire lives, or maybe it's the first time that they're coming to see this, but spiritual warfare just continues to come up. So why don't you share a little bit about maybe the Liber Christo method, the spiritual warfare, and what you've been seeing here in the culture that may be different than what has been in the past generation?
It's a good segue into our good entrance way into these various topics, but I think that to comment on one of your statements, you're exactly right. Is modern man is pursuing novelty. He's There's an interior restlessness because there is very much a shortage of the truth, and men are hungry for the truth. For us as Catholics, the truth is a person, and that person is Jesus Christ, and he is in very short supply today. And various other alternatives, false alternatives are out there, even an ape within the Catholic Church. And so we're seeing this become more and more prevalent. And this is a one of the reasons that we developed the Liber Christo protocol was to bring clarity to not only those who are afflicted, but to the practitioners that seek to help them. And so I think this is, if you employ a medical model, this is the preventative medicine side of this thing. Early on, before microscopes, before we were able to look at things on a microscopic level, we knew that there were pathogens, contagions. We knew that there was something that if you did not clean or sterilize a wound, something would set up in that wound and would cause an infection. And then once we got microscopes and other things, we could actually see it. But the reality of the contagion is there, whether you can see it or not. And that medical analogy is a good way to describe the diabolical. They are present among us, they're with us, cheek to cheek, if you will. But
Hmm.
they must have, there must be a vulnerability. There must be some entry point, if you will.
Yeah, you reminded me, I saw online here recently that there's this painting. I can't remember who it is, but as you were talking about kind of the entry point and the way that the diabolic works, is the painting, it's of Christ sleeping in the desert, and you have the devil that's just sitting there right next to him with the spear, and then he's got his fist clenched right there on his knee, and he's just sitting there just looking at him. And some of the observations about that particular painting is exactly as you're saying, right? It's like the diabolic is there. I mean, it may not always be at the same level, but looking for that opening. And in the painting where it depicts the devil and you see Christ just sitting there sleeping soundly, not worrying about anything, the devil could not find an opening to exploit because of who the person of Jesus Christ was. But that's not always the case with, common man, just with human nature being what it is from the fall. And, one of the passages that really kind of stands out to me when we talk about, this these tools or understanding, the power of the diabolic around us, it comes from Matthew's gospel when the apostles are sitting there talking about, well, we've done all this work and we still were not able to get this demon out. And Christ comes back and said, well, this kind it required prayer and fasting. And so those are maybe a couple of starting points here. And this Liber Christo method, when you look at the spiritual war and the spiritual combat that we may face, kind of reflecting on this passage with Christ talking about, well, you've done this thing, but there's more that you may need to discipline yourself. Can you walk through kind of how these disciplines may impact our daily lives, or maybe changes, or maybe things that we just need to be aware of, knowing that the spiritual world that exists around us is ever present, and we need to kind of open our minds to this.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good point. It is always around us, and it's not to be fearful. It's not to speak the language of attack, but to speak the language of opportunity. Um, the realization of pathogens and contagions opens the opportunity for cleanliness, for
Hmm.
sterilization, for proper hygiene. And so there's an analogy. But the front line of the diabolical spiritual warfare, the front line, the skirmish line, if you will, is temptation.
Hmm.
Um, because the battlefield upon which we meet is sin. And
Hmm.
that is a very important concept is in order diabolical affliction is based on relational dynamics between creature to creature. In order for there to be a relationship between two creatures, there has to be a point of compatibility, a point
Hmm.
upon which they agree. And I think this is one of the things that we lose is that the understanding that we become psychologically compatible with the demon when we seek the novelty, when we seek the exception, when we entertain the thought of sin. Now we're opening ourselves up. And so simply the idea that we must have an opinion or know something about aliens, classic example.
Hmm.
There's no mention of them in a way in which divine revelation requires you to have knowledge of them to achieve everlasting life. This is that security of obedience, that security of we know what we need to know when we need to know it in order to attain the good, to attain to everlasting life. So they're really a non-topic if you are seeking sanctity. If, however, you are curious And curiosity is a vice, not a virtue. If in
Hmm.
fact you are curious, then the demon is willing to come to you in that guise if you're willing to entertain that thought.
Yeah, and think just kind of speaking on the aliens one real quick, and not to distract too much more, but when I first saw a lot of the discussion come around on this, it was amazing how it's presented, and in this particular situation, right, is it's this life is out there, there's something else, there's this creation, and we're making this allure, and it really does start to present itself in a way that it creates doubt. Maybe it creates wonder, allure, this, that, and the other. And, so in those ways, what are some examples that you've shared with others on either how to discern? That we talk a lot, or we hear people that say discerning the spirits, understanding kind of what is around us. So in that instance, maybe going back to your disinfectant analogy, how would one maybe identify that this wound is there, or maybe the start of the door maybe it open, and what can they do about that?
So it's a good question. Part of the Liber Christo methodology is the in-depth diagnostic of determining exactly, is there a diabolical entity here? Is he here in an extraordinary capacity? If he is
Hmm.
here, how is he here? And so that's three very discernible steps. It's the same with regard to infection. There are
Hmm.
signs and symptoms of the infection. Is it here? If so, how is it here? So is there still something in the wound? Is there something in the wound, a foreign body, an ongoing contagion that is going, an object, if you will, that's going to
Hmm.
prevent the healing, the sterilization and the healing? And so what that is, and we find over and over again, is some idea of victimhood, injustice, some idea that God is somehow at fault.
Hmm.
And even though they may not articulate it that way, this is a subtle psychological compatibility with the demon who finds fault with God. He's known as the great accuser, and we often think that's him accusing us to God. But more
Hmm.
often than not, he in fact accuses God to us. A loving God wouldn't do this. You have same sex attraction. God made you this way. You have a psychological deviancy. You were made this way. You're not culpable. At the
Yeah.
heart, at the heart of the alien discussion is the idea that there are creatures out there that are not subject to Christ. And if there are creatures out there not subject to Christ, then perhaps I'm not subject to Christ. Perhaps I'm not subject to the cosmic law. And this is one of the mantras of the modernists, even within the Catholic Church, is
Hmm.
this idea that somehow Christ is not sovereign in all the universe.
Yeah, as you were talking, the next scripture that comes to mind, and it's one of my favorites because there was a priest that I knew back when I was living in Wyoming, and he had said this to me once, and it has resonated with me. And this was probably 15, 16 years ago, but this is in Luke's gospel where Christ is talking to Peter, and he's saying, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith not fail, and now being once converted, to confirm thy brethren. And that concept, and maybe concept is not doing it justice in terms of, being subject to Christ, but knowing that that intercessory power works in a way that, kind of flips that whole accusation on its head. So thinking about the tools and the medicine, or maybe the repair of these things, like what are some of the things that you found that work really well to help maybe start to heal the wounds, or to protect the soul of somebody that is becoming aware of this spiritual battle for their soul around them?
So one of the first focal points or points of lucidity is the person who's diabolically afflicted
Hmm.
begins to realize that there are things about the demon which are not consistent. So we have elements of psychological compatibility. For instance, you and I are psychologically compatible with regard to this subject. But the
Mm-hmm.
more that we begin to broaden this subject and spend time together, now we're going to find areas which we are not compatible. And so, if, for instance, I am, which I am not, but let's say that you find that I am a avowed polygamist,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I profess this. So at that point, you're not going to go along. You're going to say, I agree with him on 99% of the things, but this is a deal breaker.
Yeah.
It's at that point that the demon says, no, 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 no. We have a relationship. You owe me. And so
Mm-hmm.
now he becomes intimidating, and it follows a domestic abuse model after this. Is you were in for these things, so I'm demanding that you be in for this, and you say no, 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 no. I got a prick of conscience. I may be psychologically compatible in blaming God for the untimely death of my father or the abuse by my uncle. I may do all of that, but I'm not willing to go to this depth of depravity that you're suggesting. Now it's game on. Now breaking up is hard to do. Now the
Mm-hmm.
demon starts to afflict, to intimidate, both psychologically and physically.
Wow. And it does come on in a hurry. I mean, I've heard Father Ripperger talk on a couple of different occasions, at least watching some of the videos that have been put out online, and just how the level that somebody may become afflicted. And if I'm correct in my understanding, like there's not, I open the door, whatever that may be, and then now I'm full on demonically possessed. Is that right?
Yeah, so the demonic possession is not the most troublesome, actually. The most troublesome is the second and third level obsession, where the human is still psychologically compatible with the
Mm-hmm.
demon on multiple things. And so, for instance, you determine that our friendship is of utilitarian value to you. So you're going to begin to try to talk me out of the polygamous stance, or we're going to avoid it, or we're going to agree to disagree, and that's not going to work. It's the same with the demon. Is the human may be getting a benefit, occult knowledge, they may be getting some type of power, prestige, some type of government position, whatever that may
Mm-hmm.
be. And then the question is, to what extent am I going to compromise my conscience? But possession is a result, full possession is a result of a long term relationship like this, whereby one becomes more and more compatible with the demon. So, for instance, the issue between you and I in this analogy is polygamy. And so at some point you begin to entertain, okay, well, maybe that is a viable solution. Now we're moving toward possession. And then once
Mm-hmm.
you become a polygamist, now your will is truly weakened, because you've given up that point of conscience, that point of moral clarity. You've given that up. You're now compromised in order to have the relationship.
Hey, Alaska. This is Todd with Must Read Alaska. In our state, we know emergencies can hit fast, whether it's a winter storm, remote travel, or just being hours from care. That's why we are excited to partner with The Wellness Company. Their medical emergency kit gives you peace of mind with 8 life-saving prescription medications right at home, like certain antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics, plus treatments for a wide range of common illnesses. It includes an expert guidebook so you know exactly what to use when it matters most. No more scrambling when the roads are bad or important medications become scarce. Be prepared like a true Alaskan. Right now, listeners get 10% off plus free shipping on every order. Just go to twc.health/Alaska and use the code Alaska at checkout. That's twc.health/Alaska, code Alaska. Stay ready, Alaska. Yeah, I mean, many of these examples that you've given here, I mean, they're very simple and applicable, in terms of that relationship, the handshake, the legal agreement, how somebody can find their way in, and then, what it ultimately is going to take in order to kind of unwind or cast that spirit out. And then if you step back and you look at where we're at in today's culture, where we have a lot of people that are coming in, and as we're looking at the battle for souls, uh, how is it that you're seeing this unfold maybe in your ministry and what you do across the country? Are you seeing, more people with this curiosity kind of faltering between, hey, I'm learning all these great new things about Christianity or the faith that I grew up with, but this other thing still is here, or the noise is getting louder. Like, how would you kind of describe this maybe on a country scale in terms of our ability to recognize this problem, and then what can we do about it?
Well, it's a great question. And so, what you're seeing societally is also what's happening in the church.
Mm,
It's interesting how these things work along because what's moving in the world is also moving in the church, sadly. What's moving in the world, what's happening in the United States is that for the first time, we're seeing people openly profess ideologies and
hmm
practices that are against the tenets of our country, that are
hmm
against the very uh, founding fabric and foundation of our country. We're seeing that. And
Yeah.
they're demanding to be called citizens. They're demanding, quote, rights. The exact same thing is happening in the church when you go and see a pride mass, when you see Jimmy Martin saying, come as you are.
hmm
And this is inconsistent with our faith in the same way that Sharia law is inconsistent with our civil law, our
hmm
criminal law. It's inconsistent. They cannot coexist. And so we do a great disservice to the soul when we say you can join the Catholic Church and keep your homosexual ideology. You can keep your
hmm
transgender ideology. You can keep your um, modernist, your relativist, your synodal, your heretical ideology, all are welcome, all lead to God. This is the huge diabolical psychology, the huge element of psychological compatibility that we see shared not only societally, but also in our church.
Yeah. Uh, and it is really interesting, how this stuff is manifested. And I think over the last several years, we've probably seen more of, what people like to talk about is this unmasking. We're seeing the true colors of the society and the people, lately with the Mamdani, whatever he was doing on July 4th. And now we've got democratic socialists and communists that are really starting to come back out again, but these all kind of are rooted in this atheistic approach to just seeing human as not in the image and likeness of God. And so, on a country level, when we start looking at what it means to be a Catholic, and in particular, maybe a Catholic man, maybe share some examples of, you've been around the country, you've seen these different things, you've helped different dioceses, I'm sure, in the Catholic Church as well as in the Protestants as well. How would you describe or make a pitch to that man that is now either coming into the faith or relearning the faith in a way that makes them understand what this mission is? And if it's a Catholic, right, that mission of confirmation.
It's a great question, and the way you phrase the question is very appropriate. I think that first and foremost, we have to understand what it is to be a Catholic man. What does that mean? What does it mean to be Catholic
Hmm
in a traditional sense? Because in the modernist sense, has no value. In
hmm
fact, it's an impediment to sanctity. It's an impediment to um, merit. Modern definition of these things um, sidetracks if and keeps one down, and as St. Thomas would say, keeps you trying to satisfy the lower faculties,
Yeah.
rather than seeking merit through the conformity of will to God's will. What is God's will? God's will is to be Christ-like. Christ was the the conscience of the culture of his time, and the church was instituted to be the same, to be that counterculture voice, to be that voice that says, no, that's not right. This is right. This is the path to sanctity. This is the path to God. This is how you prepare yourself to meet the just judge. And we've got to go back to those fundamentals, because that's how spiritual warfare is fought and won. Is there are three elements to engaging in combat? There are three elements. Number one is you've got to be able to get there. You got to be in shape. And so if you're spiritually obese, meaning you've been going to a Bundini rite or a Novus Ordo or some type of feel good, rah rah charismatic mass that's fed your emotions, then you're spiritually obese, because there's been no nourishment, but you're fat, you're out of shape, you can't go the distance. And the
Hmm.
moment it starts to become uncomfortable, no matter how fervent you are to fight for the Lord, you can't even make it to the battlefield. And
Yeah.
so you've got to be spiritually in shape. There's got to be discipline. There has to be an element of purity. A man's purity and chastity is his power. We've got to understand that. And that doesn't matter if you're a husband, a brother, a priest, a father, a grandfather. The merit of your prayer, St. Joseph's power was his purity. His symbol is the lily.
Hmm.
Modernly, they redo St. Joseph's image as a much younger man with some type of carpentry tool, and want to list him as terror of demons.
Hmm.
Terror of demons comes way down St. Joseph's litany. In the ranking, it's pretty near the end.
Hmm.
But most chaste spouse of the Virgin Mary,
Yeah.
protector of the Christ, here's where his power is. And that's where our power is as men. So, number one, you got to be able to get there. Number two, you got to be able to go the distance, meaning the temptation that comes, these are opportunities. These are not attacks. These are opportunities. And then the third one is to be able to keep your wits about you at all times, because it doesn't matter how tough you are, doesn't matter how strong you are. If you can't think your way through what's happening to you, then the demon's going to win.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were sitting here talking, one of the things that came to mind, it was a talk that Father Ripperger had given, and it's always stood out to me in the last few years, is this concept of, in probably today's age, and we don't know exactly how long this age will be, but in at least in the modern times that we live, one of the things that he had said that really stuck out to me, and as you were describing, kind of this, you know, getting to the battle and then being ready, is this pursuit of heroic virtue, and that there is no better time than now to grow holy, given all of the things, as you were talking about the culture. We have any number of the different ideologies that exist here today. We have any number of the ideologies that continues to permeate through all the institutions, including those in the church and government. But this heroic virtue, and how people can grow in holiness and attain, a state of being that orients them to heaven. So when we talk about the virtues, what are some of those virtues that, men should be cultivating right now, in terms of, how to engage in the spiritual battle, how to be a Catholic man or a Christian man in today's age? You talked a little bit about purity and chastity, but are there other virtues that you think that would be good for us to work on to help with changing the culture?
Yeah, I think first of all, we got to change ourselves before we can change the culture.
Hmm.
And what you have to do is Father Lahode wrote a book, Introduction to Mental Prayer. Dom Lorenzo Scapoli wrote a preliminary volume, Spiritual Combat. To read those and let yourself be formed by those. And what they say is very clear that it's not one virtue; it is all the virtues working in concert. And we're not called to practice the virtue that we lack, that we prefer, the one that's deficient. And so
Mhm.
nobody likes to do leg day. If you're lifting, nobody likes to do leg day. And so you got a lot of guys that are in the Catholic Church that are top heavy. They got a tremendous sense of justice, but they have bird legs. They got no fortitude. They got
Mhm.
no way to go the distance. And so I think that the first thing you do is you engage good counsel, somebody who, an older man who is a holy man, an older man who's lived a life, lived a vocation. We don't do multi generational because we don't have multi generational households, but we need to get
Mhm.
back to that. We need to get back to multi generational masculine gatherings and council, not to talk about sports, not to talk about those things, but to say, look, here's your chance for heroic virtue, but heroic virtue only stands on natural virtue. What does that mean? How can you develop the virtue in your nature? So supernatural prudence is only going to come to a base of prudence. Grace builds upon nature. The grace of a supernatural virtue has to have a natural version of it, and that's the version that we cultivate. There's several talks. I got a lot of talks on Monte Cristo
Mhm.
.net about virtue, the four cardinal virtues and their 64 daughters, the three theological virtues. But we really need, the first entry point into this is we need to learn and begin to think and speak the language of virtue, so that when you are going to a mentor, when you're going to a man and you're saying, look, here's what's moving within me. I'm hesitant to schedule a meeting with my priest and say, Father, you said some things in the homily that I don't want my family to hear. And I need to talk to you about that because that's my obligation. And so when he comes to you and he says, okay, I'm fearful of, I don't want to say that, then the older
Mhm.
man has to be able to lead him through an examination and say, do you fear that because of his reaction to you? Do you fear that because of other people's reaction to you? Do you fear that? Why do you fear it? And what is the definition of fear? St. Thomas defines fear as the unmoderated response to a perceived future evil. Most of the time, that perceived future evil is a perceived lack of respect or perceived humiliation. And so men are paralyzed by this, is they think that if I just wait this one out, perhaps he'll see the error of his ways. And they don't recognize that that's cowardice masquerading as prudence.
Mhm.
Um, we're as men, we're not called to be silent in the stance of injustice. We're certainly not called to stand behind our wives while they call out an injustice.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I've heard a couple, on that last point, there's a few folks around the country that they will make the point, right, is there would not be a need for a moms for liberty if we had a dads for liberty, or men just being men. So that's a
Precisely.
really interesting point there. But we've got a few minutes left here, Mr. Clement, and one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, in your ministry, you've seen a lot, you've done a lot, and a lot of it is, when we look especially at the Catholic side of deliverance and just how we approach the um just the discipline of a good prayer life and incorporating all these things. We've got the sacramentals, the rosary, we've got all the various litanies, and on your website here, I was looking at the intake prayer prescription protocol. When you look at all these things, and it's, as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, man, I should probably incorporate more of this into my own prayer life. But when we look at the Protestant, our Protestant brothers here, that they may not understand fully the sacramentals or the sacramental life of the Catholic Church, but they're, as in the gospel where the apostles see, hey, this guy's casting out somebody in your name, but he's not with us. And Christ says, anyone that does things in my name, I will. I completely butchered that one, but anyways, how would you, share this with the Protestant brothers of, what are some things they can incorporate, until the time is such that they see some of the grace benefits that flow from the sacramentals and things that we have in the Catholic Church.
I think you do it from a masculine standpoint. You know, you ask a guy, you say, do you fish? Do you
Hmm.
hunt? Do you play softball? What is the thing that you do? And there's going to be something that he does. And so let's say
Hmm.
it's fishing. Then ask him, are you limited by your equipment or are you limited by your practice?
Hmm.
Um, and so Protestantism limits you in practice because ultimately Protestantism, a man should outgrow, even if he's born and raised in Protestantism. Um, the man who's seeking the truth and is strong enough to go where it leads him, he's going to end up in the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
Because the more you press the faith, the more you challenge it, the more you seek answers, the more you're led to Holy Mother Church. Not the
Yeah.
modernist ape of the church, but the one true church, the pre-Vatican II church. And there's a third rail that I just kicked on purpose. But we really got to think about where we are modernly, and this is why our church is no longer this thing we call the church is no longer addressing the issues of our time adequately and profoundly like we did in the past, is because we've departed tradition. We've departed the deposit of the faith. And so that's part of our masculine duty, is to preserve the faith whole and entire, even when the hierarchy's not.
Well, that's great. That is really great advice here. And Mr. Clement, this has been a great talk here. You've shared some really good stuff. We're excited to have you come up here to Alaska, and we'll make sure that we can get the information out to as many people as we can. But if somebody wanted to go and learn more about the work that you do in your ministry, where could they find you?
So that thank you for the opportunity. So go to Monte, Monte, Christo, CHRISTO.net. You can go to Liber Christo, LIBERCHRISTO.org. And you can go to Purify the Church, PURIFYCHURCH.com. There is social media as well on Purify the Church on Instagram and X. We're also doing a big movement right now, which is called the Last Crusade. You can find that information at lastcrusade.us, lastcrusade.us. And what Last Crusade is about is it's about uniting the clans. It's about bringing all Catholics together, everyone who has an issue with the modernist, synodal, heretical, post-conciliar ape of the church. And this is everybody from sedevacantists to Novus Ordo who are disgusted with pride masses. But all of us have a problem in varying flavors and degrees, and we need to unite so that we can kick the sodomite pirates off the bark of Peter.
Yeah, very good. Well, this is great. We'll make sure that we have all of the information there in the show notes here today. And we really do appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. And if I remember correctly, you do a daily podcast as well. Is that something you'd like to share with everybody?
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. So that daily podcast is called Reclamation Theology. It's on Supercast, and you can register for that on the montecristo.net website.
Very good. We'll make sure that people have a chance to go and find that if they want some more info. Mr. Clement, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us here at Must Read Alaska today. And for all of those listening, thank you for the time, and we will see you next time.
You're very, very welcome, Todd. It was a pleasure to be with you.